Okay, everybody, I think we'll get started. We're here to talk today about the idea that I think many people have held dear for a long time, which is if states could begin programs themselves, maybe it could expand and create a much larger program that would realize the many benefits that I think we all understand can come from a national and ultimately international economic system of regulating emissions that allows the right incentives to flow to people to reduce the emissions at the lowest cost. And of course, we didn't get that kind of national system in the United States, at least not yet, and may not for some time. So I think we're really at the point of not only thinking seriously about multi-state efforts, but we're at a point where that's going to become much more interesting, I think, in just a matter of weeks when EPA issues their proposed rule on 111D, which will set targets or give guidance for emission reductions, at least many people expect it will, for states to achieve. And then each state will have its own plan that we'll have to develop, and those could be diverse, or they could be convergent, or they could be lots of things. So I think this is a very timely panel, and we have some of the leading practitioners and thinkers about linking up existing state programs, and as well as adding new states to existing programs. We're going to hear in sequence from our colleagues. Here, Michael Gibbs, who's the Assistant Executive Officer of the California Air Resources Board. So Michael is in the driver's seat, so to speak, in terms of AB 32's cap and trade system and the linkages that it's anticipating and already making, including the one with Quebec, which takes us to our second speaker, Jean-Yves Benoit, who is the director of the Carbon Market Division of the Ministry of Environment in Quebec. So these two gentlemen can give us tremendous insights into the ongoing linkage between their two systems. Next, Justin Johnson, Deputy Secretary of the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, can, I think, share perspectives from another linked system, the RGGI system, which happens to share a border with Quebec, and I think can give us some insights into what may lie ahead, or the opportunities and challenges in linking up linked systems. Then Katie Sullivan, who's the Director of North America and Climate Finance for IETA, the organization. And Katie hopefully will be able to shed a lot of light on the things that IETA members, who are primarily businesses and the business community, see both benefits and challenges in diverse programs and linked programs, which, as a business guy myself, I think that's incredibly important, because actually it's those of us who have the emissions and have to reduce them under programs who are really some of the prime, shall we say, clients for efficiency and effectiveness in program design. And finally, Billy Pizer, Associate Professor, Sanford School at Duke University, a noted practitioner both in the academic field and in the policy field on climate change, and an economist of some note who we're honored to have, who can help us sort of stitch all this together into maybe some things that would help us and others think about as we go forward and try to make this kind of system work more effectively in the future. So with that, let me turn it over to Michael, and he could get started.
Great. Thank you, Steve, and thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to be here at the conference again to talk about the status of our work on California's climate program, including the cap and trade program, and the plans to enable California's program to link with others. We have long discussed the benefits of enlarging the cap and trade program through linking, including enabling timely and meaningful climate action among more jurisdictions, improving the cost effectiveness of the program, and sharing the costs of creating and operating the systems necessary to run the program. We've also been mindful of the risks that linking could pose and the care that's required to mitigate those risks and manage those risks. We've discussed those issues also at this conference and have benefited from the discussions. So I think it's a milestone that this year at this conference, on this panel and in other panels, we are now discussing the completion of the first linking of California's cap and trade program. So I'm particularly pleased to be participating on the panel today with Jean-Yves Benoit from Quebec, who, along with the leadership in Quebec, has been so instrumental in achieving this milestone of linking our programs. So I'd like to first remind us of what it means for us to have linked our programs, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the steps and what we've learned about how we came to link. So in the next slide, I'd like to just define what it is we've done as we've linked our programs. Linking is accomplished through three aspects. First, the two programs, California and Quebec, accept each other's compliance instruments. Emission allowances and offsets issued by Quebec and California can be used in either program for compliance in the two programs. The second element is that we have a common program tracking system, which we call KITS, which stands for Compliance Instrument Tracking System Service. And the KITS enables those compliance instruments to be transferred among entities in the two programs. So KITS is fully developed and fully enabled so that participants in both programs can transfer allowances and offsets if they decide to do so. And third, the linkage allows for conducting auctions of our allowances jointly. Currently, we've each held, California and Quebec have each held auctions separately, but we are planning to complete our work on the systems and processes to support a joint auction. So it's these three things that enable a single market to develop for compliance instruments, which we believe unlocks the benefits of linking our programs together. But as most of you, I'm sure, are aware, who've been following the development of the programs, there's a lot more to it than just these three things on the slide. We worked to identify those aspects of the programs that needed to be harmonized, and in some cases that we felt needed to be identical. And we've harmonized our regulations, reviewed and tested our procedures. In some cases, we had to develop new procedures to manage certain functions jointly. So in order to achieve those three things, it's taken a lot of work. Throughout the process, of course, we've benefited from those who've come before us. We're thankful to the RGGI folks, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, who have shared their experience and the way they created their program and their links. We were able to have advice and the example of the EU emissions trading scheme and all the things that they did, and the US EPA acid rain program. And of course, what we tried to do is take the best of what had come before us and add our own creativity and our own improvements so that we could create a model that would enable us to expand to more jurisdictions as well. So I'd like to go to the next slide and discuss some of the things we've learned along the way. And I think based on this experience and the collective experience from folks who've worked on this is we have a map of sorts now to demystify the process of harmonizing programs to the point where they're able to be linked. There's much discussion these days about different types of linking of programs. Certainly the Section 111D developments could lead to certain types of linking. The California-Quebec link is one type. But based on our experience, I would suggest that any type of linking that's being discussed, any type of linking where one program is accepting the allowances or instruments from another program, needs to examine all the items on this list. Based on our experience in working through this process, our experience looking at the other programs, and work by others, and I would certainly want to include in that list the work that Dallas Bertrand and his colleagues have contributed at RFF, who've also looked at the degrees of alignment that are necessary to link programs together. So I would like to just say a few words about each of these items, and the first is programmatic alignment. What I mean by programmatic alignment is the stringency of the programs that are proposing to link. In California, we have a statute referred to as SB 1018 that requires the governor to determine that any proposed link is to a program that is equivalent or more strict than the California program. So clearly, any sort of link that California enters into, this topic needs to be discussed. It's certainly on the table. And I think that any time a jurisdiction wants to create a link, this question is going to arise. And so you need to just address it head on. My own opinion is that when you look at stringency, it goes beyond just a numerical value of some such and such percent reduction from some baseline. That's not everything there is about stringency. I like to think of stringency more in terms of what I would call ambition, because we recognize that each jurisdiction comes with a different endowment of resources, has a different history and track record of what they've done, what they've accomplished, and so they're all starting from slightly different places. So the level of ambition really has to be compatible among the programs that are proposing the link. The next on the list is regulatory alignment, and I think this is just fundamental to any link, is to demonstrate that the compliance instruments that you're proposing to use in exchange are in fact of equal integrity and of equal quality. Among other things, that means that the programs and the regulations need to be sufficiently aligned and protective so that you can be assured that the instruments are of the appropriate quality. I think this is one of the things that is actually easier to do because the regulations themselves become public as they're being developed, and you can go provision by provision and compare what your regulations are and what their regulations are and find any deficiencies and discuss and resolve them. This is something that we did in a systematic way in our process with Quebec. It also provides an opportunity for stakeholders to see everything that's going on, because linking really has to be a transparent process, and there's no way to avoid that, and you wouldn't want to, because you want to have all the input and insights from the community. Legal alignment, I'll just mention briefly, is to ensure that the individual programs have the authority and capacity to enforce their requirements. Again, the statute in California requires a legal analysis to ensure that any linked program, as well as the California program, can be properly enforced. Systems alignment is something that we've worked a lot on with Quebec and our other partners, which is developing the registries. In our case, as I mentioned, the kits for tracking all the allowances and ensuring that those are properly secure and that they have the necessary procedures for managing them. It's not necessarily required that all linked programs use the exact same system, but from what we saw happen in Europe, I think we can understand that when you have different systems, you have to understand the seams between the systems and ensure that you have proper security and procedures around those seams. Two others that I've added to the list that you don't often see, I refer to as institutional alignment and compatibility with jurisdiction priorities. I think we're really fortunate in California to have a great partner in Quebec on the institutional alignment, which is our institutions in California and Quebec are well aligned so that we can collaborate and communicate and solve problems together and keep our programs harmonized. Like any program of this level of ambition, there's going to be adjustments, there's going to be changes, and if you're linking, you're going to have to be able to work things out and keep the programs harmonized. And aligning those institutions to do that is really a process that takes time, and I think we've been very fortunate, and I would not want to omit that as part of the map of how you link programs. And finally, I have a catch-all that I've added called compatibility with jurisdiction priorities. Certainly undertaking a program of this magnitude is a big investment, and any jurisdiction is going to want to ensure that the program satisfies not just greenhouse gas emissions goals, but economic development, attracting investment, jobs, air quality goals, and the like. Fortunately, linking cap and trade programs really help satisfy all those goals, and so we're in a good position. So to wrap up, I would just emphasize that having proceeded through the process, multi-jurisdiction collaboration, ultimately proceeding with Quebec. I'm optimistic about the ability to expand cap-and-trade programs in North America. We have a much better map than we had even just a few years ago, and I think now what we need to do is get to work. Thanks.
Well, great, Michael. Thanks. Jean-Yves, you want to give us the Canadian-Quebec view of this linkage, the same linkage process?
Yes, Michael, can you pass me your note? I can basically repeat exactly what Michael said. I'm going to try to have a different perspective. Can you go to the first slide, please? As an introduction, I just want to say again that we designed a program through the Western Climate Initiative. We spent many years with California, with other partners, BC, Ontario at the time, Washington State, Oregon State. We're part of the partnership in designing our cap-and-trade system. So both of us, we have the same design, which made our life easier in the process of linking our system. Can you go to the next slide, please? I'm going to present very briefly Quebec's cap-and-trade system. You may not know it as good as the California system. Our first compliance period began January 1st of last year. Just like California, we are covering industry and electricity, not only production, but also importation. In April of 2013, we had a first pilot auction to test the auction platform. Just like in California, we have free allocation to trade-exposed sectors, basically the industrial sectors. The first free allocation was done in May 2013. This year it was in January. On a yearly basis, we're going to freely distribute allowances each January to eligible covered entities. So far, we held 2 auctions. Those are Quebec-only auctions. The first one, December 2013. The second one was March 4th. Tomorrow, we're announcing, the registration period for our next auction that will be held May 27th will begin tomorrow. Auctioning is going good so far. As Michael mentioned, we linked our system last year. We signed a linking agreement, and our system have been linked since January 1st, 2014. Basically what it means, we can exchange allowances between Quebec, California covered entities. Quebec's covered entities can use California compliance instrument to respect Quebec's regulation, and it's the same thing in California. Just like California, again, second compliance period, we're going to blend in the fuel, so we go from the narrow scope to a broader scope. Next slide, please. Linking the systems together. Michael gave a list. I think I'm going to get most of the elements. Being part of the Western Climate Initiative makes linking easier. We had the same draft design recommendation. We defined the scope, cap setting, all the requirements together. Reporting guidelines were developed in partnership as well. We wrote in 2010 the detailed program design, which is a model rule actually. Offset system essential elements, those are the basic criteria to be able to link offset what we were looking for. So we have the same design. It should be easy, but no, it's not that easy. We wrote our regulation, California wrote their regulation, its regulation. Even though we had the same model, we had to compare our regulation line by line. It was a year-long process. We harmonized our regulation to make sure that we were able to link. That was done in 2013. And now we linked. Next slide, please. We created WCI Inc., a nonprofit organization, to provide us with services to ease managing a regional carbon market. Kits is provided through WCI Inc. The auction platform is provided through WCI Inc. Market oversight. WCI Inc. should make linking easy. Common infrastructure, as I just said, same help desk, same market monitor, financial services. We share everything. But again, it's not that easy. How do you manage, coordinate a common tracking system? How do you manage, coordinate a common auction platform with two jurisdictions? Basically, we had to go through our processes, review them, compare them, line by line, process by process, step by step, in order to make sure that we were compatible, that if something happens, how do we react? Who makes the decision to press pause, to postpone an auction? Is it California? Is it Quebec? So many little details if you do really the same type of linking that we done, basically creating only one market. I guess Reggie lived through that one as well. Next slide, please. That was my part on linking. Now if you look around the world, we have Reggie, who has an ETS in place has been in place for many years in North America. Now you have Quebec, California, WCI cap and trade system. The EU ETS started with 15 jurisdictions, expanded to more than 30. China is putting in place some cap and trade system, at least some pilots. Australia, Kazakhstan, Japan, in South America, Chile, Brazil. The Mexican government has an intention to put in place a cap and trade system in the upcoming years. So throughout the world, ETSs are spurring, action is spurring around the world. Now the next goal will be, or the next issue is basically not should we act, but people are acting. How do we link, how do we work all together? Next slide, please. And this is my last, well, no, this is not my last one. So with all those systems, how do you link them together? Before going on my list, I just want to give a few principles, and this is probably what you should retain of my presentation today. What exactly is a cap and trade system? What does it do to cover entities? Basically, the first thing, when you have a cap and trade system in place, emitting greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere has a cost for an industry. It will impact either positively or negatively the profitability of a business or of an investment project. So now we have a price on carbon. Cap and trade, compared to a tax, compared to traditional regulation, offers some flexibility. So for a covered entity that decides to make investment to reduce its greenhouse gas emission in such a level that they receive more free allowances than what they emit, they can sell those allowances back in the market, therefore creating a rent or a benefit on an annual basis, paying for the investment. Same thing with an offset project. To spur investment, for the decision makers to really make the decision to invest millions of dollars right now, they need to have a certainty on the future price of allowances. I don't want to undermine Reggie or the other system, but we've seen in the Reggie a backloading or some sort of an oversupply problem. We've seen it in the EU ETS Phase 1. We've seen it in the EU ETS Phase 2. And for someone to invest millions of dollars, not knowing if in 3 years the price will go from 30 euros to a few cents a ton, we're not really going to get the investment and the mitigation we are looking for with our cap and trade system. So if we are to link the California-Québec cap and trade system with other ones, what should be looking for? What are the elements to consider? Michael had a great list. I have one that is slightly different. Next slide, please. So different element to consider. Probably the first one, and it's the basis of each system. I should not spend time, I should not even mention it. It's common knowledge now. Reporting regulation, a ton has to be a ton in each system. If I take one power plant in Quebec, move it to California, we have to come up with the same amount of emission if we calculate the emission based on our reporting rules, on Michael's reporting, on California's reporting rules. So that's one thing, and this is something for sure we're going to be looking for. Approach to allowance distribution, well, linking cap and trade systems should not create a disbalance in the competitivity of our businesses. So that's one thing we're going to be looking for. Auctioning, I will pass briefly. Probably the most important part for us that we'll be looking for, thinking about the last slide, we want to make sure that we are sending a long-term signal, a certainty on the future price of carbon, market price and price containment mechanism. With our broad scope, we're going to be auctioning 2/3 of our allowances. We have a minimum auction price that is increasing on a yearly basis. Therefore, it's very unlikely or extremely unlikely that the price in our market will be below that minimum auction price. So at least we are giving a signal right now to decision makers to invest and telling them that they're going to have a return on their investment in the future years. And we're already seeing in Quebec some investment being made to reduce greenhouse gas emission. Linking with another system that don't have those price containment mechanism might be delicate. We were looking a few years back at the RGGI overallocation. They could have flooded our market. Same thing with the backloading in the EU ETS. They can flood our market. Do we want to link with them at the moment? Maybe not right away. We would like to explore the issue a little bit more. And then market infrastructure, different registries, different auction platform. Registries has to talk to each other. This is technical work. If the willingness is there, it's just about time and a little bit of money to make it happen. So that is not an issue, but getting back on price is probably the most crucial issue to look for when we are to link markets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So some aspersion cast on Reggie for over-allocation there. Justin, do you want to take up the baton here, if not the gauntlet?
Sure. I mean, I think that the over-allocation piece is a really big piece, and it gets to one of the questions about future linking that I'll come to, and that is, under what circumstances does somebody come in, to a linking arrangement? RGGI, I'll just go back a little bit and talk about it, because RGGI had it easy in terms of linking in a sense, because we agreed to do it at the beginning, and so the process by which we set it up involved all the linked parties, which obviously is a little easier. For those of you who don't know, there's 9 Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states that are involved in RGGI. It's essentially a single cap across the region. It only applies to power plants of 25 megawatts or higher, so that's one of the challenges for us in terms of linking is we take just a sliver of the economy, whereas both the California and Quebec programs, as you've heard, are expanding beyond a narrow section of the economy to be fairly broad. We have joint control periods. The first one ran 2009 through 2011, and the second one is 2012 to the end of this year. And we have quarterly allowance auctions. And perhaps importantly, to go to one of the points that both the speakers made is while we don't all treat the allowances the same way in terms of what we do with them, we do tend to reinvest in energy efficiency. So there's some bill reduction, bill assistance, but they're all abatement strategies. So they all work together. They're not incompatible with each other, what we do with the revenues. And I think that certainly makes the linked partners feel more comfortable about the system, if nothing else. As I mentioned, RGGI was a formally linked program right from the start. You had 9 independent jurisdictions, it was actually 10. It's now 9.5, I guess, because New Jersey could be in or out, depending. And so what happens in terms of the linkage is that the CO2 allowances are issued by each state. The compliance occurs at the state level, and a CO2 allowance, 1 allowance equals 1 tonne, and it has to be turned in for a tonne of emissions. And those allowances are fungible across the region. So even though the allowances are tagged to particular states, they don't actually, that's an artificial thing. And all the allowances are RGGI allowances. We have an allocation process which determines where the money goes, which is another question which I'll get to in a moment. And so that's important because it means that any allowance issued in any state can be used by, or bought, can be used in any other state. Some of the benefits for us, particularly, I come from the state of Vermont, which is the smallest player in RGGI. And so this idea of liquidity in the market, actually having enough market activity and enough players who are prepared to come into the market to provide the liquidity to have a market is really important. It'll be very difficult for my state individually to do that on its own. Risk mitigation, the opportunity to manage risk across a broader number of sources and to have both obligated entities and also speculative entities playing in the market helps to manage and mitigate risk. There are some political benefits here. I think it was said earlier in the day, earlier this morning, that California is down here and British Columbia is up here, and everybody's looking for a friend. In the Northeast, we have some friends, and that is helpful. We all know that the political sort of ebb and flow isn't identical in every state all the time, and so being part of something a bit bigger than just one state is helpful. And then benefits to the sort of regional energy policies and decisions about how regional energy policy might work more efficiently than doing it state by state. When we have, what are unnatural sort of political boundaries that don't always line up with some natural boundaries and also ISOs and things like that. So there's a bunch of benefits that you get from the link, and we saw that right from the beginning. The way RGGI does it is we started out with a memorandum of understanding. This is a very broad, high-level document between the states to say that we all agree that we want to do this. The next step was to create the RGGI model rule. This is a rule that says, for each RGGI jurisdiction, here's a rule you can look at. You're free to change it, obviously. Each one went through the rulemaking process in each state. And then you had the budget trading programs in each state, stakeholder process, which involves all the states, and a program evaluation that we do every 3 years. The result of the first one was the reduction in the cap to try and address the challenges with the over-allocation, and there will be another one in a year or two. I think it's a year. It feels like we just finished the last one. Where we'll go through another process to review with all the linked partners how the program's working, whether any changes need to be made. So I think the things that provide a sort of fundamental benefit and a uniform across the region are the auction itself, the platform, which is somewhat scalable. And this will sound familiar, the centralized allowance tracking and emissions tracking platform. Ours is called COATS. It's a bit like KITS, but it's called COATS. These are fundamental things you have to have. You need to be able to keep track of who has what allowances, who's obligated to, at the end of a compliance period, to retire allowances, that sort of thing. And keeping a uniform, central and reputable source for emissions data is critically important. The last thing you want to do in a linked system is start arguing about the data. And obviously it's a market-based system. The market wants access to the same information at the same time across the market, so you don't have any issues with fairness or trading irregularities, and that's something we take very seriously. And so that's what we do, we share data. Market monitoring of the auction is really important. Having consistencies in offset protocols. We can talk about offsets in RGGI. We've never had any, but because our price has been too low, but maybe one day we will. So we do talk a lot about what they would look like, though, and the opportunity to have them. Obviously, public reports, when RGGI as an organisation is going to report information that might change the market or otherwise provide information to the public, that's coordinated amongst the states so that we're using the same data and the reports go out at the same time. And the compliance period, obviously, across the linked jurisdictions needs to line up. I think that makes it much simpler for everybody to know when they have to actually have the allowances in place. There's a lot of market strategies that whether a company that's obligated or a speculative buyer would want to keep in mind, and we try and keep that playing field as level and as open and as clear as possible. And then perhaps where things divert a little bit for us is what happens to those proceeds. The states spend the money in different ways. As I mentioned, some states have used the money to buy down the cost of people's bills, the power bills. A state like mine in Vermont has spent about 98% of the money has gone into energy efficiency programs. But this is where the real benefit comes in being linked to a bigger program, but then having that state-by-state ability to try and address the needs of what you're doing in a way that works for your state. And the one thing we have to always remember, and we've had this conversation back and forth in RGGI, is the money is great. I mean, it is always nice to get a check after an auction that comes into the state, but it's not really about them. It's not a money-making program. The idea is to reduce emissions, and so having the flexibility to reduce them in a way that works for your particular circumstance is critically important. So in Vermont, for instance, we use it mainly for thermal efficiency, which is not electricity related, but we are one of the highest users of fuel oil in the country at fairly high levels of emissions, and it's something that we need to address, and it means that we can it's a lot of money that leaves the hands of Vermonters every day, and it's somewhere we can make a really big difference. And the $1.6 billion or so dollars we've raised in RGGI across the last 23 auctions has gone in large part to reducing emissions and trying to make people's lives a little easier, and I think it's been very successful because of that. And so the only other thing I'll say is that we made a decision at the beginning of RGGI that we'll auction essentially all of our allowances, except for there's a couple of little sort of differences there, but mainly we auction everything. We don't give away allowances, and I think that's been a very successful approach, and one that has helped to actually achieve the reductions we've got. So thank you.
Well, thank you. So, Katie, from an IETA perspective, maybe a slightly different perspective than a program designer perspective, can you share your thoughts and observations about linking and not linking, and kind of what works and what doesn't?
What works and what doesn't. Is it on? Can you hear? Can you hear me?
No.
Yeah, I think it needs to be switched.
Maybe try it again.
Oh, there you go.
Hello?
Yeah,
Hey.
now we can hear you.
All right. Thanks very much, Steve.
When you move, it's just,
Okay.
Hello? I have a loud voice.
There you go.
Okay. There we go. Thanks very much, Steve. We're good.
And thank you for having me here today, Car, and for this great conference, and really quite an esteemed group of panelists up here, and always interesting to hear from the horse's mouths, regulators, the issues and challenges and opportunities that they've been experiencing so close to home on the linkage front. So from a business perspective, well, with IETA, for those of you who aren't familiar with IETA, we're corporate only, business members. We span the gamut, really, of the carbon value chain, our members. So from the large emitters to the financials to assurance providers to project developers, and also just internationally, that's the big international in our name. We see the development of these carbon pricing systems, emissions trading systems, cropping up all over the world. So there's enough fragmentation happening in the North American context that makes things challenging from a business perspective. But then going at the 50,000-foot level, you see it globally right now, how these carbon pricing systems are starting to develop, and some in ways that there's very little alignment, and or there is, I guess it's still nascent days, and therefore there's a window of opportunity for some type of harmonization to happen at the outset of these programs to then enable linkage with other existing programs down the line. But again, it goes from a business perspective, especially those that are trying to operate and invest and plan that are across jurisdictions and looking for opportunities, right? So not just from a compliance entity's perspective that has operations and different compliance obligations in Australia versus California versus British Columbia, but also from an offset project developers and investors perspective that wants to get into the offsets piece and other opportunities. It's tough, because this is what happens when the Kyoto world that we anticipated in that global price on carbon with those global universal rules and infrastructure brings a tear to my eye, but that didn't happen. And so we're living in a world of fragmentation, and it's challenging, but it is good to see that, especially through initiatives like the World Bank's Partnership for Market Readiness, which I'm sure you'll hear more about later today or tomorrow, and through some other initiatives that I'll bring up later, where you do see regulators and with business also at the table and experts at the table looking through which areas of alignment and collaboration might be pursued in order to enable linkage down the line, or some type of linkage down the line. On the PMR piece in particular, it's something that IETA has put a lot of time and energy into through our business partnership for market readiness, because you have these, 14, 15 recipient countries that are planning to put in place carbon pricing mechanisms. And so you had the global map, Jean-Yves. I should have put up our global map, but they are all over the world and at different stages. But the PMR is trying to put money into capacity building and resources to inform the development and implementation of these programs in a way that actually works, can leverage experiences, lessons learned, best practices from existing programs, and do so with, again, an expert business perspective, which is good to see. And it's, I think, this business partnership for market readiness has seen a lot of support, at least so far, where we've gone to Guangdong, Shenzhen, Korea, and next mission will likely be in Mexico to bring that business perspective into how you can design a program from kind of the bottom up with a view to potentially linking down the line or linking by degrees. As you point out, the concept, linkage by degrees, that Resources for the Future and Dallas Bertrand really coined and came out with earlier last year, has gotten a lot of traction and a lot of attention, because It's not the full-on, by tomorrow, Quebec, California style allowance offsets trading that might happen right away, but there are absolutely these other areas that close coordination can happen between jurisdictions, like the MRV piece, the monitoring, reporting, verification piece, like just the development of infrastructure so that they at some point are able to talk to each other or become more centralized down the line, like offsets, thinking through different offset project protocol types and essential criteria elements that can be aligned as these jurisdictions are building. So I want to take a moment and look at yesterday, literally 2 days ago, I was in Vancouver, and there are a number of people in this audience who were with me, and it was the Canadian story that's playing out, where you want fragmentation happening in a jurisdiction. Canada is just a nice little hub of fragmentation. You have British Columbia with a carbon tax and offsets. Next door you have Alberta with an intensity-based system, 30-plus offsets, eligible offsets. A tech fund also as a compliance instrument. You have Quebec, obviously, cap and trade system, offsets. And so, it is, what we've seen recently is a recognition, I'm not going to say certainly a formal sign-off, that all provinces and territories are committed to working together, but over the past year there is movement from these subnational jurisdictions to say, okay, look, where can we begin to link our programs, or at least link the critical areas of our programs that might enable a more formal linkage, direct linkage down the line. And I think there has been movement, particularly on the MRV piece. But there has also been the identification of infrastructure work that should and can be done, and also offsets. And frankly, looking at the work that WCI has done over the years, I don't like the phrase. I always say I don't like the phrase before I use the phrase, but the reinventing of the wheel, and not going back to some of the analytics and the comparative analyses and just the work that's been done through WCI that had already leveraged a lot of experiences and lessons learned from the EU ETS space and from RGGI. You're sitting on years of really thoughtful work around, okay, how can these systems link and do so in a way that works from the political side and through the consultation with business and other stakeholders, hopefully, work from a business perspective as well. And I want to, in particular, point to 2 or 3 projects that, we have pointed to, at least in the Canadian context. The offsets, the white paper on offsets and ensuring high-quality offsets as the 3 regions, at the time, 3 regions, RGGI and WCI and the Midwestern Greenhouse Gas Governors Accord have put time into thinking through, okay, how can you reconcile the decisions around offsets across these 3 currently different programs. And that's a good document, and the work that actually went into that document should be revisited, I think, now more than ever before, as other jurisdictions are looking at this. The other piece is also the protocol adaptability and adaptability review that was done, where you actually scan the current existing offset protocols that are out there, and then not necessarily about ranking which ones are the best or prioritizing which ones are the best, but which ones might meet these essential design criteria that then could be adopted or adapted into the WCI system. And so I say that because I keep looking at 2 of you, and even the RGGI are sitting on these reams of information and how to really think through the linkage exercise. And I think that the timing, maybe it wasn't right, even a year ago or 2 years ago to broadcast this or to find neighboring potential linkage partners. But I think the time could be now where some jurisdictions are starting to become open to putting some time, energy, and resources into to moving ahead. But very importantly, to also make sure that the business community is engaged in this process so it works from a private sector perspective and is as transparent as possible. So that's all I have to say.
Great.
Thanks.
Well, a very interesting perspective, especially the notion, I think the first three speakers gave an insight into the really devil in the details issues around linking programs either at the same time or sort of sequentially. Your view that potentially when they're highly fragmented at the beginning, there's ways to have some common elements that over time could allow them to evolve to a more efficient system is both sort of daunting but maybe ultimately kind of hopeful. Billy, bring us home here. Help us make sense out of the huge amount of work that has been done and that probably still needs to be done in light of the clear potential that the fragmentation that Katie talked about between a tax system, an intensity system, and a cap-and-trade system in 3 Canadian provinces could be replicated many-fold in 50 American states.
Well, first of all, let me thank Steve and everyone on the panel. I've been at Duke almost 3 years after 15 years in Washington, and Duke's a great place. I get to train the next generation of people who will probably be at these meetings and do a lot of cool research. But it's really valuable to be with the folks who are really doing the work, and I look forward to getting feedback on the kinds of thoughts we're having down in Durham. I guess I wanted to make 3 points. Steve suggested 3 or 4. I'll stick with 3. The first one, just to reiterate, I think a theme that's gone through this is that linking is here to stay. Linking is the future. I say that really for 2 reasons. One is that there is no way to achieve significant reductions without market-based mechanisms. In these discussions of 111, is there going to be trading? Is there not going to be trading? That can be debated, but there's not going to be significant reductions unless there is trading. So some sort of market-based mechanisms are going to have to be part of the future of every jurisdiction if significant progress is ultimately going to be made on the problem. And then the second part of that is that economic forces of the sort that several people mentioned here, Justin mentioned the problem with being a small jurisdiction and trying to do a market mechanism. Linking is just an appealing feature for either liquidity or cost savings, or some of the other benefits that people have pointed to. So, I see the future being linking. Now, it's important to realize that, links can't happen everywhere. Market mechanisms are not all the same. I mean, California has probably 3 different ones with the LCFS, the RPS, and the emissions trading scheme. You wouldn't probably link those together. So a real important, the second point is really thinking hard about when, where, and I think importantly how systems get linked together. Yves talked about the importance of price stability in trading systems in order to encourage investments and predictability and things like that. It's also pretty clear that different trading systems are going to want different prices. Reggie wants a different price than California and Quebec. And so an interesting question is, and there's also these autonomy issues, whether it's a unwillingness to harmonize or an inability to harmonize. And so the question is, can you have linkages between systems that aren't fully harmonized? And I think it's an interesting area of work. I mean, clearly, yes, you can have quantitatively limited linkages, like we have for offsets, used in, between ETSs that would allow the prices to stay different and features to stay different, but would still achieve some of the gains to trade. Another area that some of us have been thinking about is, could you have systems that were not formally linked pool their ability to respond to adverse market events. Think about the reserve mechanism in the California system. Would it be useful for multiple systems to share a common reserve that they could access? So you might think of this less as market exchange of allowances, but almost government-to-government transactions to try to deal with adverse events. And maybe you could set something like that up ahead of time. And there's actually a group at the World Bank that's been, among others, thinking about that. But, you know, so you could have these limited things, but obviously some jurisdictions, like Quebec and California, are going to kind of make that ultimate leap of faith that we do in life and merge together into one and establish a full bilateral linking system. And I guess the third and perhaps more controversial thing I'd like to talk about for a few minutes is what might happen when the honeymoon is over. You know, I think one of the things that we've seen is that links don't always last. Reggie has the example of New Jersey withdrawing from Reggie, although maybe it'll come back. Australia, I mean, obviously has not linked to the EU ETS yet, but certainly the political changes in Australia suggest how a jurisdiction that one day may be a partner could the next day change into having a very different opinion about its policies. Although maybe as things progress, that reversal seems more or less likely. That would be a question to ask. But I think it's just kind of obvious to think that as time passes, priorities aren't going to change, and some jurisdictions are going to want to exit. And the problem is that if their markets are linked, delinking between two jurisdictions can have pretty significant market consequences. And I think the question is, are all of these market consequences necessary? That is, are there adverse consequences to the market that could be managed in a delinking process in a way that could be less adverse? And I guess I kind of think about it you know, kind of as a series of steps, if you want to think about this. The first question is, how might a delinking occur? You have two types of allowances. Maybe they just revert back to the jurisdiction where they originated. That was kind of the situation, I guess, in Reggie, that the New Jersey allowances, the future ones, just were never issued, although the existing ones were honored in the system. You know, a second possibility is that the allowances are treated the same, but split. So, you know, if Australia and the EU had linked and they decided to go their separate ways, every allowance, whether it's Australian or European, goes into like 0.8 of a European allowance and 0.2 of an Australian allowance. So that would be another way you could do it. A third way you might do it, you know, would be whoever happens to be holding the allowances at the time the delink occurs determines where it goes. So if you're holding the allowances, whatever they are in Australia, they stay in Australia, and if you're holding them in Europe, they stay in Europe. So you can think about a lot of different ways that this might take place. And I guess, you know, the question that I ask, or I kind of want people to maybe think about is, you know, are there things you could do ahead of time that would make either of these things easier, depending on which delink model you think might take place? And then you ask kind of the last question, which is maybe there are some things that you could do that might mitigate adverse market consequences. And let me point out that, you know, these adverse consequences don't necessarily happen just because a delink is imminent. There could be speculation about delinking that could be equally damaging to the market. If people began to think that Australian allowances were going to be more valuable, and I'm using, you know, Australia and Europe just to not pick on anybody at the table here. But, you know, suddenly Australian allowances people think are going to become more valuable because they will have higher prices when the systems separate. People could speculate about that even if the systems remain linked for a very long time. So you're worried not just about delinking, but speculation about delinking. So are there things that the jurisdictions could do in order to mitigate those adverse consequences. I mean, one thing you could think about is maybe they could make a commitment to say if there was any delinking that everybody would be treated equally. You wouldn't treat the Australian allowances any differently than you treat the EU ones. So there would have to be a split of some sort. So you could think about those sorts of mitigating measures, but then you ask this last question, which is mitigating the risks or the consequences of delinking or speculation about delinking, is it worth whatever costs those measures might have? So I think in this EU-Australia example I'm working with here, there was actually a lot of conversations that people had or questions that people asked of the Australians during this conversation about what would happen. Would there be a clause for Australia to get out of the system? And they really didn't want to talk about it. And I think the reason they didn't want to talk about it was they were afraid that even talking about the possibility of delinking would create speculation about delinking. So I think you have to ask the question, is it better just to avoid it and not talk about it? Or is it better to try to be explicit about what may happen? A friend of mine always says, how many of you in the room who are married have prenuptial agreements? I mean, it's just not the kind of thing you talk about. But I think it's an important question for people to be asking as these full bilateral links are contemplated, is exactly what may happen if the links end. But I do think linking is going to be a huge part of the future. It's not going to be everywhere. We have to figure out where it makes sense and what kinds of links make sense, and are there other options other than the full bilateral link. And then the last thing is that I think when these full bilateral links are pursued, there needs to be very careful thinking about how the end might occur if it has to occur. And I think a little bit of forethought about that could avoid a lot of market duress in the event it happens or the event there's speculation about it happening.
Okay, so not exactly reaffirming the view of economics as the dismal science, but...
Yeah, I was going to say it's a little bit of a downer, but sorry.
So I just feel overwhelmed by the information that this panel has shared with us. It's been really enlightening. And as I was trying to think of questions, I kept seeing group rides and realizing, that's like people riding bicycles in groups. So all my questions would be all with bicycle group analogies, like who's drafting on who, what happens when the guy with the fixie joins the group ride where everybody else has got 18-speed road bikes. What happens when somebody in the middle of the peloton falls down? I think Billy just told us how that could unwind, and people could be betting on it enough to make somebody want to throw the ride. Or, how stable are our groups when a new rider joins? And I guess, Katie's thing is, well, what happens if some people are riding fixies, some are riding mountain bikes, and some are riding Harleys, and some are driving on the left side of the road and others are on the right side? So I'm not going to go there. I'm going to ask what I hope is, I want to ask two questions, hopefully both really provocative. So the first one is, one of the huge attractions, I think, of cap and trade in the Washington debates of 6 or 8 years ago was the idea that you could tailor the allocations to essentially reduce or buffer the political resistance. There's an almost magical kind of political economy formula that many of us find attractive about cap and trade, although it didn't seem to actually work in the U.S. Congress completely, not in both bodies. So I guess a question in terms of the WCI AB 32 RGGI Quebec model or cluster is the same states that in the Senate actually didn't vote for the cap and trade bill in 2009 have a lot of coal, and there may be a linkage there. And one of the thoughts for how to address that is to give some sort of allocation to buffer the impacts on coal producers, coal utilizers, and consumers who are served by those entities, which was a feature of the Waxman-Markey bill. And as I look at the sort of coastal adoption pattern that is showing up in these linked and potentially linked things, I don't see that kind of feature. So I guess my question for I guess, the first three folks here is, do you think that you could have a cap and trade set of state systems that would be linkable, that would make something like the Waxman-Markey allocations to coal and to electric load serving entities, with the goal of buffering the sort of immediate distributional impact without changing the marginal cost of emissions and the efficiency advantages of the equimarginal principle? So that'll be my first question for just maybe you three. And if Billy and Katie want to chime in, that would be, of course, welcome.
I could start.
Yeah.
That was a long question.
Yeah. How about coal allocations?
And we could say a lot about all this. I do want to get to your question. I wanted to thank the WCI advertisement that we had, because I think there was a lot of important work that's still available on WCI. And I think one of the things that should be mentioned about that, which gets to this point, is that the WCI work was done with a community of states and provinces, not just for California, not just for Quebec, to develop a system that would work for all of them. And I think it's different than if we had just tried to do what might work for California. And so it does have a broader appeal. And so I think it speaks to this question of, can you design a linkable cap and trade system that works for states that start with a different set of resource endowment, is what I was referring to before, these coal states, whatever. The first thing you should recognize that California is a microcosm of exactly that. We have in Southern California heavily coal-dependent electric utility systems, which we had to address in our allocation. And the way we've approached it in our multi-jurisdiction discussions is that we have this issue of competitiveness that we want to be attentive to. So we all have cement plants, we may all have refineries, we may all have other industrial facilities that we want to treat similarly, so that we don't use the cap and trade program to create competitive advantage or distortions there. But in this issue of electricity, where we have such different resource bases among just within California, and then comparing California among the western states, and certainly very different between California and Quebec, we have to recognize that in the electric sector particularly, you have to tailor your approach to allowance allocation and auctioning to fit your specific circumstance. So the RGGI approach was to agree to auction a minimum amount and then to actually auction all of them virtually, which was the ultimate decision, which works within their context. I think in California's allocation approach, we took a slightly different approach, in part because of exactly this question of recognizing the different sort of resource endowments that we have among our utilities just within the state. And we allocate the allowances to the distribution utilities, who then must consign those allowances at auction, and there's a level playing field for all the generators to purchase at auction. So we get to the outcome, essentially, of what RGGI had, but that allowance value is then within the electric system and used for the ratepayer benefits, okay, for the cost mitigation, but also for energy efficiency and other purposes. And so we were able to solve that problem through what we consider to be a somewhat innovative approach of how to determine the allocation and then how to direct the value of that allocation to be used on behalf of ratepayers. And so I'm hopeful that that would be viewed as a positive innovation that might be instructive for helping solve this sort of political economy issue that you raise, which I just have to come back and say that I think California is just a microcosm of exactly that. We're not in a situation where we don't have those facilities. We do. They happen to be out of state, but they're owned by our in-state entities. The power comes in. So really, when you work it through, it's the exact same problem. And I think at least we were able to come up with an approach that works. And I would think we should be able to come up with approaches that would enable us to link with others who take their approach that's unique to their circumstance and can work with it.
Good. Well, great.
Yeah.
So, RGGI sort of already did this once in a way, and there's I think two big decisions you have to make, both of which are fraught with danger. The first one is the cap. What's the cap, right? Reggie did a lot of work, a lot of economic analysis in order to determine what our cap should be the first time around, and he got it wrong. And the second thing is the allocation within that cap. That was much more just straight up political in many ways. I mean, the ultimate arrangement that we have for allocation under the cap was partly related to the individual circumstance of the emissions of the states within RGGI, and partly related to the sort of the political deal that had to be made to get states in and sort of committed. And because the cap was wrong, one of the reasons the cap wasn't right was the fuel switching that took place. And the fuel switching also means the allocation is a little off. When you look around the states, some are over-allocated, some are under-allocated. So you have two decisions which are almost bound to get wrong at some point, or at some level. And so then, let's say another state comes along. You know, when you look at the states that are sort of border the RGGI region to the west, for instance, pretty much any one of them, it doesn't just arrive with a small number of emissions. It arrives with more emissions than the RGGI program has now in its entirety. So it's a big decision, and the question is, where do you set the cap, and what is their allocation? And I think one thing that the RGGI folks have been thinking about is that those two things are not necessarily the same. So you would not show up at I'll just pick just randomly, Ohio, right? Ohio, you don't say that they have, say they had 100 million tonnes. You don't say, well, you're in, we'll raise the cap 100 million tonnes to account for your 100 million, and we'll give you 100 million allowances, and then we'll go on our way. That would be the simplest way to do it. I'm not sure that that's what we would do. A whole bunch of things come into play, and I think there's the this is the emissions reduction thing. We worked really hard to reduce our emissions. Our electricity costs a lot more than yours because we've been doing this, and so now you've got to feel some of our pain in order to come in. There's that approach. Then there's the political overlay, which says, gee, it'd be really great to get you in. We know you're not in the same place we are, but the sooner you start down the path to reducing emissions and take advantage of our great program, the better off we all are. So those two things work in opposite directions, and I don't really have an answer for that, except that I'm hopeful that one day we'll actually have to have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, yeah, please, Jacques-Yves and Jean-Yves.
I may want to add a little bit on what Michael and Justin said. Each jurisdiction faces a different mitigation cost. We each are unique. We don't have any emission coming from our electricity sector. 98% is renewable. Within California, the electricity production is quite different. In Vermont, it's completely different than Quebec, even though we share the same border. Same thing with Ontario. RGGI covers electricity. We also cover industry. And from one industry to the other, mitigation cost curve is different. So at the base, we could auction 100% allowances. Makes a lot of sense in the energy sector. The cost can be passed on to consumers. For trade exposed industry, we're going to close them. It's going to be 100% leakage, and we're going to be worse off if we auction everything. So really, the benefit of cap and trade is to play with allocation, to make sure that we send a price signal to each different type of industry, a price signal that they can support, but most importantly, that will strive mitigation. And I want to point out at a difference between the WCI system, Quebec, California. Expected price around 2020 is anywhere between $20 and $30-something a ton. The RGGI is designed at the moment, and I don't know what are with the allowances that you remove, but it's something like between $4 and $10 a ton maximum at around 2020. If we are to start linking systems together, for us, having a $4 a ton is not enough to strive mitigation in Quebec. All we would do in linking with someone that would drive the price down is basically an outflow of money from our province to another province for them to reduce. We do want some investment to be made in Quebec, so we need a certain price of carbon within our jurisdiction. Now the question, would RGGI states be willing to have a price of $20, $30 a ton? I don't know. This is one thing to look at, different prices. So could we use allowance distribution? Could we use an international or North American reserve where RGGI can keep its price signal at around what they think is right for their economy, put some allowances in and out? Could we do it as well with the WCI? And then other system, the EU ETS, the World Bank is working on that. I really don't have an answer on this one, but I think different prices around the world may be needed, at least at the moment. Long-term goal is to have a unique price system. Everyone knows it, but we have different economies, and it might not be the optimal goal we should be aiming at. It's more a question than an...
Billy, did you have something on this? I want to go move next to the audience.
I just wanted to highlight something that was kind of lurking in these comments. I mean, there's a distinction between the allocation as a compensatory mechanism, either among states or to particular industries or particular types of generators, and the issue of effects on consumer prices, consumer impacts, and competitiveness, which kind of depends on the pricing through the products. And so there, it's not just a question of who you give the allowances to, it's how you give them the allowances. And as Michael and you pointed out, tying it and requiring it to be passed back to consumers is very different than giving it to the power sector or giving it to competitive industries or industries facing competition on the basis of their output continuously updated as opposed to some historic measure is also very different. And so you need to think about those issues carefully.
Indeed. So I'd like to open the floor. There's a microphone there. If people just maybe instead of me calling on folks, you just go stand by the microphone and sort of first come, first serve. Adam, I think
I like that rule.
Yeah. Well, you got it. So.
I'm Adam Diamant from the Electric Power Research Institute. Several of you, Michael, Jean-Yves, Justin, you all mentioned, and Michael in particular, talked a lot about what's required to align the programs. I really appreciated that. My question has to do with over time, and this would be a great example, and I think RGGI has to deal with this, and California and Québec. Rules change, right? The Air Board is constantly doing updated rules, new kinds of things. Québec probably is too. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the challenge, but more importantly, how do you try to maintain that harmony over time? And same with RGGI. I mean, you guys just did a major change in the program, and you have a process that from the outside appears kind of cumbersome to harmonize. And I was wondering, again, if RGGI can talk to, what's the challenge there, and how do you deal with that challenge of harmonizing the program, not once, but keeping it harmonized over time?
I'll try and be quick on this. I think that the process is that we have a regularly scheduled program review process. So that's the first thing. So that enables you to sort of collect up those things that may need to change and at least address them through one process each 3 years. And it was a long process. I mean, the RGGI board essentially met for a year. They did some research, collected some data, and then met and talked about it for a year. And maybe that's easy to do when you've got 9 jurisdictions. If you had 50, I think it would get very cumbersome. But we were lucky. We have 9 jurisdictions, and they're relatively homogenous. I mean, they're close together. They tend to share a lot of the same values and same goals here. But at the end of the day, I think it was just a matter of sitting down and having a conversation, right? Okay, what are the things that need to be tweaked? What do we think's the best way to do that? Is there some data we can collect? Can we model that? What would it look like? Does it have any adverse, particular adverse income on one jurisdiction over another? And then work through those things and sort of, I don't know how else you get there other than sitting down and having a conversation. And it does take time, but I think by having it on a scheduled basis, you at least take out the bouncing all over the place. And then what we did practically was we redid the model rule and sent that back to each state. And I thought it actually worked amazingly smoothly to be able to introduce a model rule and within a year, just less than a year, have that rule go through every state legislature or state rulemaking process and come out the other side.
Yes, sir.
Yes, David Wright with Plains All-American Pipeline. Once you get one of these systems set up and you have it lined out in kind of a steady state type situation, you have some kind of a major either international event or, for example, a nuclear situation in Japan, like maybe if Russians cut off gas to Europe. How do you adjust the system quickly to reflect major changes like that?
Great question. What happens when a bunch of nuclear plants shut down in New England to Reggie prices, and what do you do about it?
Well,
what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, one of the reasons that Vermont has an allocation of allowances that is higher than our actual emissions is because we have a nuclear plant which is expected to shut down. And whatever we replace it with is likely to be higher. So that's a sort of planned thing. I think quite honestly, I think one of the challenges for that is for the jurisdictions that are communicating within this system to be working well enough together to actually be able to have that conversation. One of the things we did do as part of the last review was because of the fuel switching, which meant that Rhode Island, for instance, had a big increase in the number of emissions, we got together and agreed to give a portion of our allowances from a bunch of the states that were over-allocated because of this change to Rhode Island, and we just did that.
This is sort of like what Billy just said to me. That's a distributional issue, which is, you pointed out before, is one of the rather twitchy things, in that if an Ohio joins, it's complex, and it's complex dynamically as relative prices and things change inside Reggie already. But what happens if not just Vermont Yankee, but 2 or 3 other nukes shut down? Julien Demoulin-Smith has pointed out in his view, at UBS, that this could cause Reggie prices to blast through all the layers of the cost containment, maybe get to the convergence that our friends from WCI are looking for. So that's not just a distributional issue.
Right. In that sort of worst case scenario, I think the reality is that Reggie is a political creation, it's a regulatory creation, and the regulations come out of political creation. And I think whilst we don't have a sort of stated method for what happens if the system goes haywire, we do have a process. Each state legislature has the ability to step in, and I think they would. If the price was suddenly $100 a ton, then you would see political action that would rapidly provide some relief for that.
Maybe very briefly, we have some cost containment mechanism in our design. The first one will address, price of natural gas goes very down, happened. So we reduced our emission. If we have too many allowances, we have a minimum auction price. We have a way to remove those unsold allowances from the market, at least temporarily, until the market situation comes back to a certain price, and then we can reintroduce those allowances very slowly. So this is a way to contain prices in the bottom. We have the same thing, let's say a nuclear power plant shuts down and the prices start increasing. We have a reserve from which allowances can be bought at a predetermined price. At the moment, last year was $40, $45, $50. It increases on a yearly basis. But we have a good clear signal. So at least you can incorporate some features in your scheme, probably to deal with minor to medium-sized catastrophic event. We can always come up with huge catastrophic events. 10 nuclear power plant has to shut down tomorrow morning. Like Justin said, it's a political decision to implement a regulation, to put a regulation in place. A cap and trade is a regulation. For sure, if something goes very wrong, we can intervene politically to fix the problem, press pause for a few years, and then start back again, or I don't know. But if you can incorporate some features in your system, you're probably already better off not having to get consensus among 9 partners. EU ETS with 30, it's extremely difficult to get intervention. So again, another reason why we should incorporate it in the design of the system right from the start.
So we're out of time, but I see Billy wants to help resolve this problem.
I would just say there are kind of 3 things you can think about. I mean, one is you have automatic mechanisms in these systems, the reserves, that may or may not be enough. You have banking in most of the systems. It's like the European Union has a year's worth of allowances that are just sitting there at least. And the third thing is that, because the compliance isn't immediate, there's plenty of time for people to meet and deal with these issues. And as long as the markets expect them to be dealt with and they have some trust in the process, it shouldn't create a huge problem. The issue is when the decision-making body is not actually able to resolve issues. You can see that in different places. But
I thought perhaps you were going to use this moment to remind us of the relative merits of the price-based instrument, but I'll leave it there since we're out of time.
I get in trouble when I say that, so I try to steer away.
Okay, well, join me in thanking this incredible panel, not just for today, but for the careers they've obviously spent dedicated to understanding and making these really important challenges better, and the systems we have and are evolving to address them. So thank you very much.